Hello and welcome to Crediversio's Q&A live for Wednesday, August 3rd. I'm your host, David Michalek. I'm a consumer credit expert with almost 10 years of experience. I've conducted well over 10,000 one-on-one credit consultations, over 1 million disputes, and tens of thousands of inaccurate and unfair accounts being deleted from credit reports. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you what I've learned on our live Q&As that we do here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook and YouTube. So our credit reports and scores, as you probably very well know, play a huge role in so many areas of our lives. Our insurance companies, landlord, mortgage broker, banks, even our employers are looking at our credit report to see how we honor our obligations. Having great credit is critical because credit reports have become reputation reports, and they tell the story of what you and I do when we are entrusted with credit. And that is why we do these live Q&A sessions. So I always start out with a topic for this week. But this is your time. If you have a question about anything related to the dispute process, credit scores, how things work, Crediversio, that is what I'm here for. And if you looked at the title today, the title is Here's Why VantageScore Matters. And I want to dive into this a little bit. And by the way, when I'm talking about this, feel free to stop me, pop a question on the screen here. I will certainly get to it. And so let me start off by talking about this. In this business that I've been in for going on 10 years now, one of the things that I hear a lot is this disparaging comments about VantageScore. Like, well, it's not your real score. FICO's your real score. VantageScore is something else. And people really get down on VantageScore for whatever reason. And I think probably it has a lot to do with the fact that some of the bigger purchases that we make, like a home, like a car, a lot of times, especially mortgage, are going to use a FICO score, typically a very specific FICO score called a industry-specific mortgage, an industry-specific FICO score. And VantageScore, while it's probably a little more pervasive, meaning if you're getting your score from your credit card or your bank, I mean, sometimes it's going to be FICO 8, but a lot of times it's going to be VantageScore. If you've got any of the monitoring products that connect with Crediversio, Identity IQ, any of the smart credit products, those are all VantageScore. And when you go to like Credit Karma, those are VantageScores as well. Now, I want to dive in a little bit to explain to you why VantageScore more than ever really, really matters. And I want to read something to you. This is a market adoption study performed by Oliver Wyman. Okay, who's Oliver Wyman? I mean, it's an easy Google search. Just check them out. But these are the guys that study stuff like this. So I want to read this to you. It says the credit bureaus are playing the long game with VantageScore now. Real quick, VantageScore is owned by the three bureaus. It's a joint venture between the two of them. And I'm going to go into a little history in a second because I think it's very interesting. Gregory, hey, good to see you. Welcome. So here's why, I'll get into why in a second here. So let me just continue. So the credit bureaus are playing the long game with VantageScore, and it's working. VantageScore's use increased to 14.5 billion scores. That's billions with a B. So billion scores used during the 12-month periods covering March 1st of 2021 all the way to February 22nd, 2022. That's an 18% increase compared to the prior market adoption analysis the year before in 2019. The use of VantageScore in underwriting increased by 620 million scores. That's up 132% from 2019. Here's the important part. This is really what I want you to grasp and pay attention to. 9 of the 10 top banks, okay, 9 of the 10 top banks, and 30 of the top 50 use VantageScores when they are doing their underwriting. Okay, again, 9 out of 10. Out of the 10 biggest banks, 9 of them are using VantageScore. 30 of the top 50 are using VantageScore. Okay, and I'll give you my impression on that here in a second. I'll explain to you why this is happening. Over 3,000 companies, these are lenders, use their scores. All this according to the market study from Oliver Wyman. The largest users of VantageScore are credit card issuers, consumer websites, and for pre-screening and account management processes. These are generally performed by credit card issuers. A couple of other things to keep in mind. The study doesn't mean VantageScore has replaced FICO. That's not at all what it's saying. What it's saying is that many lenders, again, 9 out of the top 10, 30 out of the top 50, are using multiple scores, FICO and VantageScore. So here's why this is really interesting and really important. So years ago, FICO was adopted by the 3 bureaus. In fact, it took place in 1989, even though FICO's been around since 1956. The 3 bureaus adopted the first versions of FICO score back in 1989. So from 1989 all the way until the early 2000s, so we had decades where FICO just ran the show. Now there's a big difference between the bureaus and FICO. A lot of people think that they're the same, and understandably so. So you've got bureaus who own the data. They're the ones that receive all the payment history, all the data from what we call data furnishers. You can call them creditors if you want. There's about 14,000 of them now, and they report information to the 3 bureaus. Now, the 3 bureaus, depending on where you're getting your score from, the FICO software sits on top of where that data is coming from. So that's where you get your score from. But they're different. So you can get a credit report without a credit score. Go to annualcreditreport.com. Okay, that's a government mandated website. It's a joint venture, for lack of a better word, between the 3 bureaus, but it's mandated by what's called FACTA. That's a Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. That's from 2003, which gave people access to their credit report free. But there's no scores. Why are there no scores? Because scores cost money. Because at the time there was only FICO, and FICO, the 3 bureaus weren't going to pay for scores for something that the government mandated. They didn't mandate your scores that you had to get them free, just that you had to get your credit report free. So you can get a credit report without a score. You can't get a score without a credit report though, because the score is created based on the information on the credit report. So after decades of this, after decades of the bureau seeing that FICO is just running the show, making money hand over fist, who knows, tens of millions, hundreds of millions probably. And they said, you know what? The data comes from us. We're the ones that have the data. What would happen if we created our own score? So they hired a consulting company. So this is early 2000s. They hired a consulting company and said, hey, listen, we want to compete with FICO. If we wanted to compete with FICO and create our own score, what percentage of market share could we grab? Well, the consultants, they crunch all their numbers and they do their thing, and who knows how long it took, maybe months, maybe a year or so. And they came back and they said, you know what, you would take 100% of the market. You would have 100% of the market share because you own the data. Now, granted, FICO's been around a lot longer, 50 years longer, in fact, almost 50 years longer. But still, the consulting firm said, you know what, if you want to own the client through the whole part, you have the data, you create the score, you'll own the whole thing. So the bureau said, hey, why not? Let's join together. One of the very few occasions that the bureaus actually do something together. And they created VantageScore. And that was created in 2006. Well, for the first couple of decades, it didn't really, it's not even a couple of decades yet, but for the first, I'd say 10, 15 years, it really never grabbed more than about 10% of market share. And then something changed. What changed is that lenders are seeing that VantageScore is phenomenal at predictive risk. So what's a credit score designed to do? It's designed to tell anybody who wants to do business with us, who wants to lend to us, what is the probability of our ability to pay? How likely are we to honor our financial obligations? And that's what the score is. It's a grade. It's a grade of how well we manage our credit to try to predict, really the exact terminology is the likelihood of a major derogatory event taking place within the next 24 months. The higher the number, the lower the probability. That's why we want higher credit scores. So one of the rules with any kind of credit score is it has to be demonstrably true. What that means is that your scores have to be predictive, and you have to be able to prove that they're predictive. So what VantageScore has been able to do over the last, since 2006, is prove that their ability to predict risk is excellent. And that's why a lot of banks, 9 out of the 10 of the biggest ones in the United States, recognize that VantageScore is a great place to go to get a idea of how reliable and how likely an individual is to honor their financial obligations. Well, one of the things, the criticisms that I've heard for many, many years about VantageScore, and in all the chat and all the comments, and it's very common for people to comment and make some kind of an opinion piece without having any real knowledge on how scoring works. Totally understandable. But they'll say things like, well, hey, they call it the Vantage score, they call it the FACO score. Or, hey, your real score is your FICO score, and Vantage score isn't your real score. And that's just patently untrue. Your Vantage score, while it uses different algorithms to determine your score, when it looks at everything that FICO looks at almost the same exact way, it just comes out with a different number. And that's why when people, all the time, it's a daily thing when people email support or call into support. It's like, hey, I just looked at my my FICO.com, and my scores are this, and I looked at the scores on Crediversio, which is coming from Smart Credit or Identity IQ, and they're totally different. How come they're different? Well, they're different because they're different. They're different algorithms. I'll give you a great example. For example, right now in Las Vegas, it is 102 degrees outside. 102 degrees. That's 102 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's 38.9 degrees, let's call it 39 degrees Celsius. Well, which one's hotter? Like, if my FICO score is here, and my Vantage score is here, well, doesn't that mean that that this is better because it's higher? This is lower? Why is my FICO score lower? It's like saying, well, it's 102 Fahrenheit, but it's 39 degrees Celsius. Well, it's hotter. This means it's hotter outside, right? No, it doesn't mean it's hotter. It's just different. It's a different representation of saying the same thing. So if you've got great credit scores in the 7s and 800s on FICO, and your scores are 7s and 800s in VantageScore, although they might be 10, 20, 30 points apart, they're telling the exact same story. They just have a different numerical representation. So like I said a second ago, you've got 9 of the 10 biggest banks in the United States now incorporate VantageScore. They understand that they're going to see a different number, a different numerical representation of your score than what FICO is going to represent. So you know how they factor that is they have their own algorithms, so their own in-house factoring that says, okay, if we get a Vantage score of 675, well, we know what level of risk that is for us because we've got thousands and thousands of customers who have a score within that category. And by the way, that means the same thing. All of those clients who have a 675 are at the same exact risk as a person who has a FICO that's 702. And you can switch those numbers around. So lenders have a very, very good feel for the difference between what number they're going to get between FICO and VantageScore. They're never going to be the same. I mean, unless you have an extraordinarily unique case, like a thin file. Like, I've never seen FICO scores and Vantage scores on credit reports that were pulled within roughly the same time period be anything close. They're always off. They're always different because the data is always changing, and the scoring algorithms are just different. That's perfectly normal. Okay, so the point of the story is VantageScore is a great place to understand what your credit risk is. It's not different. You don't have to go to FICO. Now, when would you might want to go to, say, myfico.com and get your FICO score? When is it really, really needed? When you want to know what a specific score is. And that's only when you're going to be applying for a mortgage. Okay, according to FHFA, they mandate that a very specific and very old FICO score be used in mortgage underwriting. Okay, it's not a FICO problem, it's an FHFA problem. So it's a 25-year-old model. So if you're getting ready to buy a home, and one of the things that I did on my Experian app before I bought my home is I logged in, wanted to see what my mortgage score was. If I wanted to know what it was on all three of them, I can't get that from Experian. I have to go to myfico.com. But I knew I was in the 800s anyway. It didn't matter because the best rates for a mortgage at the time were 750 and above, I think. So I knew that wasn't going to be a problem. But if you want to know what that mortgage score is, you want to know what it is on all three bureaus, you definitely want to go to myfico.com to get all three of them. Gregory, let's see. Got a good comment here. Let's see. I think that's the reason why score is becoming solid. Now I'm being solicited for better credit cards. Yeah. So one of the things that I read off, Gregory, in this article or this op-ed that I read was that, what did it say here? So the largest users of VantageScore are credit card issuers. So a lot of the offers you're getting, Gregory, are going to be from credit card issuers. And in there it says, and for pre-screen account management processes, pre-screen. So what does that mean? Well, when lenders or credit card issuers or lenders of all sorts, when they want to send out a mail or an email and offer you what's called or provide you a firm offer of credit, they're going to go to the bureaus and say, listen, I want 100,000 leads in this part of the country, and I want I want them to look like this. So what they'll do is they understand what they're looking for, and they'll go to the bureaus and say, give me leads that fit this description. And that pre-screening process takes place in there, and clearly they're using Vantage scores for that. I imagine maybe to some degree they might be using Vantage scores because they might be a little bit cheaper than FICO. Oh, and going back to a point that I wanted to make a second ago. So why did it take so long for Vantage score to really become noticed and adopted in this industry, in the lending industry? And my opinion is, I think that FICO just had so much brand recognition. So much brand recognition that you could go in, I could be a FICO rep and call up on a bank, a new credit union, some mom and pop shop that's doing in-house lending and say, hey man, we're FICO. I don't have to explain myself. It's FICO. We've been around since 1956. You're going to know who we are. So it has to happen over a period of time for another offering to gain leverage, is you have to demonstrate that your value, that your predictive risk is going to be just as good as your competitor, FICO. And that's what VantageScore did. It took them a long time, probably a lot longer than what they expected. I don't think that when they went live with VantageScore 1, we're on VantageScore 4.0 now, although I think we most often we're going to see VantageScore 3.0. But when VantageScore 1.0 came out in 2006, I imagine they probably thought it was going to take off pretty quickly, because by that time they had already done a tremendous amount of data collection. They were already able to demonstrate that VantageScore was very, very effective. But what happens when you're trying to gain ground on somebody who's got a 50-year head start, 60-year head start? I mean, it's difficult. So now, when you see your VantageScore, when you're getting ready to apply for that credit card or that personal loan, or you're going to your bank or you're going to a car dealership, bear in mind that VantageScore is very likely going to play a role. So anyway, great information on VantageScore because it's going to become more and more important. And by the way, there has been some legislation. I'm not sure exactly the status of it at the moment, but part of it was to introduce new scoring models into FHFA. just in time for the housing market to go on its biggest decline. So I wish they would have done this years ago, because a lot of times, like I'll give you an example of why VantageScore, why it would be a huge asset to have a VantageScore, a contemporary VantageScore, VantageScore 3, VantageScore 4, as part of your mortgage underwriting process. A couple of things. One, it doesn't care about paid collections, and it doesn't care about paid medical collections either. There's certain things that VantageScore understands that that can be omitted from a credit report that are not predictive of risk. I don't know if you were with me the last couple of times, but we've spent a lot of time talking about how medical collections are going to be deleted from credit reports. Paid medical collections are going to be removed. Actually, it already took place on July 1st of this year. Paid medical collections gone. Sometime next year, in 2023, probably around the same time, medical collections with a $500 or a balance or lower are not going to be permitted on credit reports. So we got to wait about a year for that one. Well, why did they do that? I can make an argument that the CFPB was really scrutinizing that act, but VantageScore and FICO were able to demonstrate that medical debt was not predictive of risk. Meaning, if I've got everything else in line in my life, I've been paying my bills, but I've got a hospital event, and maybe I'm underinsured, or I don't have insurance, or some other little catastrophe is taking place. It's very common for medical debt to pop up on credit reports. I've seen it happen. Again, I remember I've been doing this for 10 years. I've had 10,000 plus on the phone, one-on-one consultations with people looking at their credit reports. I'll tell you what, I've seen countless medical collections where people are like, I had no idea. That was from my dentist from a year ago. I thought I paid everything. I had no idea. Never heard anything. Never got a bill. I moved twice, and here it is 3 years later. So FICO and VantageScore clearly understand that the random series of collections, even if it's 2, 3, 4, sometimes it's those pesky copays. Have you seen that before? You got these $20, $30, $50 copays that pop up on your credit report as a collection. Holy cow, I've seen so many of those. I mean, most of the time, I forgot what the percentage is, but it's like 30% of people who have derogatory credit, it's medical. So FICO and VantageScore both said, listen, people who pay their bills on time that are reliable, if they suddenly get a wave of medical collections, that doesn't change anything. It doesn't mean that they're a bad risk. It means just something is going on in the medical billing and insurance side. So that's why this medical thing is disappearing. Well, VantageScore understands that, and so does FICO 8 and FICO 9 and FICO 10 and 10T. These are all what we call contemporary scoring models. They don't factor paid collections. They don't factor that medical debt because they understand, just looking at tons and tons of data, that people who have that stuff on their credit report are not a higher risk. Okay. Joe's got a question. Good afternoon, David. When a bankruptcy gets a discharge, the old accounts get deleted from the credit bureaus, or do they get updated? So, Joe, great question. When you file bankruptcy, when that bankruptcy is recorded, what happens is there's what's called a moratorium that is placed on all the accounts that were included in bankruptcy. What that means is it's a moratorium. You can call it a stay. They both essentially mean the same thing. And what that means is that those creditors can no longer update any information that's on the credit report except for included in bankruptcy. Okay, you'll see that in the remarks section, or actually in the payment status section, but usually it's in both categories. In payment status, you usually see included in bankruptcy or included in Chapter 7, Chapter 13, whichever it was. And then you should see a zero balance. And by the way, if it's not a zero balance, that's actually a big violation. I've seen attorneys sue on stuff like that. Oh, and by the way, and that's something that Crediversio looks for in the dispute process. So it'll raise a red flag and write a really, really good dispute reason if that happens, and it does, common. So, but no, Joe, it does not. Those accounts do not get removed from your credit report. So you have to remember what a credit report is, or if you don't know, I'll tell you. A credit report is a chronological representation of all of our credit history. If it's positive, it can go back as far as 20 years. If it's derogatory, it goes back 7, except for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which can go back 10 years. But all of those accounts that were included in bankruptcy will remain on the credit report. Now, here's the good news. When you file bankruptcy is actually, like I always used to say when I was actively involved in the credit repair process, when I was doing credit repair for one of the largest credit repair companies in the US before I came to Crediversio, I would tell people, and I would also tell my sales team of credit consultants, that bankruptcy were one of my favorite accounts to work on because they were really easy to clean up compared to anything else. And the reason for that is when you send disputes to accounts that were included in bankruptcy, a lot of times you get them deleted. Now, that's not to say that they have a heavy derogatory effect on your credit, but they do have an effect on your credit to some degree. But when these accounts, whether charge-off, collections, whatever they were, accounts with late payment history, debts that you included in bankruptcy, whatever they were, when you create a Crediversio account, Crediversio is going to see these things as derogatory. It's not going to miss them. And it will give you a suggested reason if you want. I mean, there's really no other reason there isn't a different reason to dispute accounts included in bankruptcy other than just the one reason, which is programmed into Crediversio. And a lot of times you get those accounts removed, and it helps a little bit. But I wouldn't fret so much about that, and here's why. When you file bankruptcy, it is actually really easy to recover from a bankruptcy. It's easier, and again, I'm not telling you anything that I have not personally seen and watched take place, but I've watched people who have filed bankruptcy. I've watched their scores go up right after bankruptcy because they've removed their entire debt load. And then recover and be back up into the mid-high 700s in 2 years, 3 years. Because bankruptcy to some degree seems to be a little bit more forgivable in the eyes of the scoring models than, say, you had 4, 5, 6 charge-offs and you got and those charge-offs turned into collections, and there's still accounts that have not been settled or paid anyway. That stuff kind of lingers. And even though the effect diminishes over a period of time, 24, 36 months, as long as you take away from a bankruptcy is just, don't put yourself in that situation again. Now, this isn't a judgment of any kind. All kinds of things cause bankruptcies. Medical is probably one of the biggest ones. Sickness in the family, economy changes like what we're getting ready to go through now, job loss. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can cause bankruptcy. But the important thing is just to take whatever lessons are available to learn from that situation and just rebuild credit with a little bit more intent and a little bit more knowledge this time around. Okay, Gregory says, you nailed it because it took me 2 years of history to show that I'm less risky, coming to 510 to 710. Awesome, 1,500 max to 15K. Crediversio is one of the components that guide me. Excellent, Gregory, I love hearing that. Yeah, so lenders want to give you bigger lines of credit. They want you in debt. I mean, we all know this. This is how they make their money. In fact, one of the funny things that I heard, this is from John Olsheimer. He was talking to a major player at a big credit card company. I don't remember who it was. Not that it really matters. But one of the things that John asked the guy, he's like, "Hey, what are your ideal clients? People with 800 scores, people?" And the guy goes, "No, actually." He goes, "Our ideal clients are the ones who pay their bills on time most of the time. Not always, but most of the time." So mid-range, meaning that they're late here and there, not like 30, 60 days late, but they missed their payment date and they get a $25 fee. They're paying interest. They are what we call revolvers, meaning they don't pay off their credit cards every month. They revolve debt from month after month after month, and they pay that, what is it now, 17%? I don't even know what credit card interest rates are now. I know they can get up to like the low 20s, mid 20s. But that person who revolves, who uses that credit card like a loan, which nobody should ever do because it's ridiculous interest, and then pays their bills on time most of the time. That's the ideal client. So Gregory, yeah, a lot of credit card issuers would be more than happy to extend your line of credit when they see that you're doing very, very well. Okay. Let's see. Mike M. joined a little late. Sorry. This was covered prior. Does Vantage give a score for all three bureaus, or is it a Vantage score separate altogether? No, no. So Vantage score. So you have your three bureaus. Actually, there's more than that, but it's really the big three that we want to talk about: Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. And a scoring model is just something that produces a risk number based on the data of the credit report. So you can get the same credit report. Like if I went to myfico.com today and ordered my credit report, I would get my FICO scores. Now, 10 minutes after I got that credit report from myfico.com, if I went to say Smart Credit, ordered my credit report, I get the same data, because the chances of the data having changed in that 10-15 minutes between getting a credit report from, say, myfico.com or Experian.com or wherever that uses FICO scores, and the data changing in that 10 minutes where I got my credit report from, say, Smart Credit, it's virtually impossible. So I can see that I'll have a Vantage score and a FICO score coming from the same data. So the scores are produced as a result of bureau data. Hope that makes sense to you, Mike. Okay, so and feel free. Like I went off on my whole explanation of VantageScore and why it's so important and why you want to pay attention to it. And now, and Joe, actually this is going to be really targeted to you. This is what I did when I went from really, really bad credit to eventually earning a great credit score. So I came into the credit repair space in 2012. So yeah, so it's been, this October, it will have been 10 years. Excuse me, I got the fan blowing right in my ear here. So it'll be 10 years. And I came here as a client. Actually, it was before that I came here as a client, but then eventually got into the business in October. So I was that guy back in 2008, 2009, and prior to that, had a lot of property, leverage to the hilt, making some bad decisions because I was just doing stupid stuff back then, like a lot of people. Not that justifies it, but my credit was just plowed, just wiped out. And I didn't really know much about credit, to be honest with you. When I got my scores, I'm like, okay, well, I don't really know what that means. And then eventually, when things went to a charge-off, I had my Amex card, my Chase card, my home went into foreclosure. Everything went to hell. And I was credit off the grid for probably 3-4 years, maybe even a little bit longer. And then that's when I'm like, hey, listen, I recovered financially. Largely, I went credit invisible for a while because it took me years to recover financially. I went from making a tremendous amount of money with a very unique skill set to, well, shoot, now what do I do? I was a commercial real estate investor, and how does that translate into anything else? I've been doing it for so long. So eventually I figured it out, and I transitioned into something else. I was doing very well, or better than I was doing years prior. And I'm like, listen, I gotta address this credit problem, because I think at the time I was driving around some old Mercedes, and not like a good type of Mercedes. I'm like a 30-year-old Mercedes that I bought from a friend who got it from his dad, who had like 150,000 miles. It would come to a stoplight in the summer, and then it would just stall. It loved to stall at stoplights. Like, why not stall at a stop sign or in the grocery store parking lot? Stoplight, just loved to stall. So I had to get rid of that thing. And I needed to be able to finance a car. So I was thinking about that. I'm like, okay, I got to address this credit situation. And that's eventually how I found credit repair. And one of the things that was just as valuable as going through the repair process, I had to learn about credit. I had no idea what FICO was, or VantageScore was, or credit utilization, or credit mix, or how your score is calculated. But I learned, and I found it fascinating, so much so that here I am. So here's what happened. When I went through the repair process, great company. It's a company that I ended up working for 7.5 years. I eventually became their executive VP, and I kind of ran the company for a couple of years. And right off the bat, I got a pretty decent deletion. 34, well, actually, I think it was about 40-50% of the accounts that were deleted, that were challenged, were deleted. 40-50%. It's pretty average. Nothing spectacular. but it really helped. And what I did next is I started getting a couple of secured cards. I got a what was it? Open Sky. I still have it, by the way. I don't use it anymore, but I don't close it. I didn't close it, but I had that. I got that Open Sky. I think they gave me a $200 credit limit. Then I got a My Jewelry Club, which was Carmel Finance. That's still on my credit report, by the way. And that's the oldest stuff. Those are the things that are giving me age on my credit report, and they're still sitting there from 2012. 2012, I think. My Jewelry Club was 2013. So really, really good history there. And then I had a couple of. I didn't have family do this for me, but I had a couple of buddies of mine add me as an authorized user. And this is my favorite cheat, by the way. And I don't use cheat like you're doing anything nefarious or anything illegal. It's just it's a hack. Let's call it that. Let's not call it a cheat. Let's call it a hack. Being added as an authorized user. So I had a friend of mine who had a card that was probably about 7, 8 years old, no derogatory history, very low balance, added me on to that card. And then I had another friend who had a card that was about 15 years old, and she added me to that card. So I got all of that history. So suddenly, this new credit that I was building got this bump up in age because I had those two. I think it was actually 3 cards that I was added as an authorized user. And then not long after that, this is probably mid 2013, I got my Chase Visa card, which I think I still carry with me. I don't use it because it's got a really low limit. Yeah, here it is. It's my Chase Freedom card. It's so funny because Chase was one of the cards that I went default on back in 2008. It was a big one too. It was like 25, 30 grand, something like that. I totally forgot. And by the way, it did get deleted from my credit report during the repair process, like in month number 3 or 4, something like that. So it ended up getting deleted. And I hadn't thought about it for years. So I remember I'm like, okay, let me go to Credit Karma and let me find out what they think I'm going to get approved for. And I applied for the Chase card, and they didn't approve me, but they didn't decline me. They asked me to call in. And so I call in, and the guy on the phone's like, yeah, we want to approve you, but hey, by the way, you had a card with us that was charged off. Now, he didn't know the dollar amount, but I'm like, oh shoot, are they going to ask me to pay it? But I remember like, oh my gosh, how embarrassing it was. Like, here I am asking for another card. I had completely defaulted on them, just a few years prior for like 20 grand or something. And I remember the guy's like, hey, and Joe, you'll find this interesting. When I was talking about how credit card issuers want to do business with you. So the guy on the phone, he was like an underwriter, and he said, so what happened with that? I'm like, I said, it's 2008. I was just heavily leveraged. I was in real estate, house foreclosed, lost everything. He's like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, so I'll approve you. So they approved me. Now, the good news was they gave me a $2,000 credit limit. This is 2013. So here we are 9+ years later, and they never increased it. So they still have me at $2,000. They trust me, but really not that much. Meanwhile, I've got like my Cap One card that's a $25,000 limit, and I've got another Citi card that's about the same, but not my Chase card. They're like, hey, listen, we're going to say yes, but we're going to keep you on a tight leash just in case you decide to go wild again. So anyway, it just proves the point that they want to do business with you. Now I never applied for an Amex again. I would love to have a Delta Amex card because, man, that thing's got so many benefits to it. But I'm still, because I defaulted on Amex too, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard many times from people that in fact, I've talked with John Alzheimer when he's been on this live with me. And I said, Amex, some of these credit card issuers do have a memory. And if you, I think I made a joke that hell hath no fury like a credit card issuer scorned, and so I still have not applied for that. But if I do, I'll let you know. But I think I will one day. I'm hoping that maybe 10 years is the mark where they just totally forget. So I think we're talking about 20 years actually. It'd be 20 years. So 2000, maybe 28 or something like that. I'll apply for it. Okay, who knows? All right, Caleb's got a comment here. 2 months with Crediversio, awesome. So I think that, are you 2 rounds or 2 months? Because if you're 2 months, you might still be in your first round. Oh, no, actually 2 months, you're probably in your second round now. So either way, congratulations. Glad to have you here. Just keep in mind, and I always tell this to everybody, my dispute process was a 6 month. It was a 6-round, 6.5, 7-month process. About 50% of it came out. 2 rounds, okay, great. So your second round is out. Very good. One of the things that just a little bit of encouragement, and everybody's credit report is different. Everybody gets different results. My credit report, your credit report's got different stuff. So what happens to one person doesn't happen to the other, or might not happen to the other. I've seen disputes. I've seen repairs in Crediversio, because we have 163,000 people that have created an account with Crediversio. It's a lot. It's a lot of people. I think probably maybe 16 to maybe 18,000 of them are currently active, meaning they're going through the dispute process right now, which makes Crediversio probably about the same size as maybe Lexington Law, maybe a little bit smaller. But a lot of people go into the dispute process. And one of the things that I talk about in the coaching video, in the intro video, is that this is a multi-round process, like a chess game where you've got to make a move, the bureaus respond, you make another move, the bureaus respond or don't respond, and you make another move. And sometimes it takes 3-4 rounds to really find out if an account can be deleted or not. So the cool thing is, and again, this is something that I talk about in the tutorial videos, in the quick start videos, when you opened up your Crediversio account and you went through everything. One of the things that I talked about is in the credit repair space, those of us who are strategic about what we do, this is round 1 is really the low-hanging fruit round. We always say that the credit repair process really begins at round 2, and here's why. And you might have heard me say this, so forgive me if you've heard me say this. But that first round, this is my opinion, by the way. I don't have any proof of this, but I've just watched 1 million plus disputes over the last decade. And one of the things that I've noticed, and other credit repair experts who've been doing this longer than me, we've all taken note of this. So this is not, I'm not some renegade person that just came up with this idea out of thin air. This is commonly believed. And that is that data furnisher. So when you send a dispute to the bureaus take that dispute electronically and send it over to the data furnisher, aka the creditor. And sometimes the creditor, when they work that dispute, they might just auto-respond and say, yeah, everything is reporting accurately. In fact, the language is everything has been verified to be reporting accurately. You'll get that on your response. Well, is it though? Did they do what they're supposed to do? In the Fair Credit Reporting Act, it says they're supposed to perform what's called a reasonable investigation. All right, so it's a lot of flexibility around that word reasonable investigation, around the word reasonable. What's reasonable? What's reasonable to one person is not reasonable to another, but they have to do something. So if they didn't really do much of anything in round 1 and they come back and say, yeah, everything is reporting fine, then you respond with, I don't agree. Now, the exception to that rule is if they send you a big packet of all your payment history, like my Macy's account did. So Macy's is one of the things that didn't get deleted from my credit report because they literally sent me a packet that thick, big old manila folder, 8.5 by 11, with all of my payment history. So they were like, no, dude, this is 100% you. It's all you. Everything's right. And it did stay. I eventually paid it, by the way, because it was just the thing to do. But that was not coming off. So if you get something like that, just know, unless you see it's demonstrably untrue and you have proof, you're probably done with your dispute process. So Caleb, just bear in mind that round 1 that's your intro round. Round 2 is that follow-up round. And that's typically when things get started. If things can be removed, if things can be repaired, that's where you're going to start seeing it happen. Doesn't mean that you won't see something happen on. I've seen accounts where, because we look at thousands of them in here, we have tens of thousands in Crediversio. We see accounts where nothing came off round 1, nothing came off round 2, maybe something came off round 3, then round 4, boom, 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 boom. Whatever happened in round 4, who knows? But that was the successful round. Okay, let's see here. Caleb with something else. First round, I try to have them prove the best. Second round is method of verification. Sort not really method of verification. You're just disagreeing with the outcome. Now they're just closing the accounts with a negative remark. Yeah, it just depends on. It depends on the status of the account. So just, again, go through the whole dispute process. If you ever have questions, you can just reach out to us. Let's see. Robert just popped in here with a question. Hey, I just joined. Send out letters today for my wife and I. At what point should we send an email and ask them to remove the dispute? Is there a letter for that? Yeah, you don't want to send an email. I'm not sure exactly. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Email to ask them to remove the dispute. Is there a letter for that? Robert, if you're disputing, oh, I see what you're saying. No, actually, Robert, to remove a dispute, disputes resolve themselves in 30 days. So what you're going to see, let me guess, are you going through getting ready to go through the home buying process? Because typically that's when people care about the in dispute status on a credit report. So when you go through the dispute status, or I'm sorry, the dispute process, in the remarks section, or it'll say there'll be a dispute status column. It's not on all credit reports, but it might say in dispute. In the remarks section, it might switch to, once the dispute is over, it'll switch to account was in dispute or previously disputed, customer disagrees with outcome, or something like that. Yeah, so Robert, yeah, that's typically what happens, because your underwriter, I'll just put this up. Yeah, so your underwriter will tell you right off the bat, there's a lot of things that you don't want to do. You don't buy a new car, don't open up new lines of credit, things like that. And then the other thing, if you've got a really good mortgage broker who's looking at your credit, or maybe they played a role in the repair process, they're going to tell you, make sure you're done with the dispute process about 30 days before you decide to go into escrow. And the reason for that is, in fact, it's too bad you weren't here earlier, because I was just talking about this. The reason for that is FHFA mandates that a very, very old version of FICO is used. Mortgage has its own specific, industry-specific scoring model. And the problem is, if you dispute something and is in dispute, the status is in dispute, that particular FICO model removes that account from scoring. So if you got 3, 4, 5 derogatory accounts in dispute, it could artificially inflate your score, because those accounts are not being factored in that FICO score. So that's why your mortgage broker, and especially your underwriter, is not going to let you go through the dispute process. Now, I've seen people shave this pretty close, and what they do is that they're trying to get this stuff deleted, but they're going to open up escrow in a week, and then they order a credit report, and there's accounts that say that they're in dispute. So if that happens and it's right to the wire, you got to call the bureaus up one at a time and say, hey, I'm no longer disputing this. Can you remove the in dispute status? And they'll do it for you. Okay. Mike, can you explain charge-off showing a balance and your suggested dispute response? Okay. A charge-off, now, by the way, a charge-off does not necessarily mean, it's more of a tax code thing. What a charge-off essentially means, Mike, is that particular creditor just gave up. The debt went 120, 150 days late, whatever that number is, whatever that time is, and they're like, listen, we're not going to get paid. So we're going to charge off the debt. We're not going to actively collect on it anymore. Now, just because a debt is charged off doesn't mean you don't owe it anymore. A debt is an asset, and they can sell that to a collection company, by the way. Now, a lot of creditors do. Sometimes they can sell it to a third-party collection company, or they can assign the debt over to a third-party collection company who will try to collect that debt on their behalf, and they get a commission of what they've obtained. So, if they assign or sell the debt to a third-party collection company, that balance has to go to zero. It's actually against the law for there to be a balance on both the charge-off account and the collection account. That's being the collection that is representing that original creditor. So if you've got a balance on that charge-off, then that means that they consider they gave up on you, but the debt's still real. It's still real money. They want their money at some point. Now there's a limit to what they can do, but that there's nothing wrong with that balance being shown there. Now, Credit Versio does make a tactical bet that they can send a dispute saying, hey, why is this shown as a charge, saying it's charged off, but why is this showing a balance? Well, sometimes they'll delete the balance. They will. It'll go to zero. but the charge-off stays. The balance isn't what's hurting you. It's that payment status, which is collection charge-off, with the emphasis on that charge-off. So as far as a dispute reason, again, the best dispute reason is always going to be the one that explains why the account should not be there. Now, if it's legit, it's yours, then it's just a shot in the dark, and let Crediversio guide you through the dispute process. You just take the suggested reason and cross your fingers. That's all you can really do. Okay. Robert, they gave me a 6/8 month timeline. I already paid off my credit cards, but I figured I use CV. Oh yeah, the Crediversio dispute the collections and charge-offs. Smart. I mean, you can't. There's no punitive action on disputing. It is your legal right under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Give it a shot. See what happens. Mike, to add, I'm asking about the show zero balance or remove. Is zero balance as good as removal? No, it's not. I think I just answered that. Or is it a two-part dispute? No. The only time a charge-off is ever removed from a credit report is well, it's really two reasons. One, if it can't be verified. It's possible. Maybe it's 2, 3, 4 years old, in which case, maybe they might not have the data. Charge-offs get deleted all the time. So that's number one, not being able to be verified. Or there's something wrong about it. Maybe the dates are wrong. Maybe the close date's wrong. You'd have to be really detail-oriented to catch that. Maybe it's a duplicate. There's all kinds of reasons why it can be deleted. But there's nothing unique or special outside of those two reasons that's going to get anything deleted from a credit report. Let's see. Have you seen auto repossessions removed? So nothing is special on a credit report. Meaning anything can be deleted from a credit report if it's under the... These are the 4 words under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Incomplete, outdated, unverifiable, or incomplete. So outdated, outdated, incomplete, unverifiable. I forgot the other one. Sometimes I get those sometimes I forget all 4 of them. But anyway, it's usually 2 reasons. It's unverifiable, or there's an error that cannot be fixed. So it doesn't matter if it's a bankruptcy, an auto repossession, if it's a credit card, a charge-off, late payments. Anything can be deleted from a credit report if and only if there's a problem with verification on the side of the data furnisher, or there's a mistake that the data furnisher cannot fix. And that's how things get deleted. Cliff, how do you dispute incorrect name that has your personal information attached to it? Just go into your... I'm going to qualify this a little bit, but I'm going to tell you how to do this first. But this is really important. Go into your tutorial section in Crediversio. There's a section called templates, and there's a letter called update personal data. And there's a template letter there with instructions that tells you how to correct your personal information. Now, having said that, if you are under the impression that removing old addresses is going to help you fix your credit, that is complete 100% nonsense. Okay, debts are not attached to addresses. John and I, and if you're not familiar with who John, Cliff, I think you've been here before, but John, who comes on with me about twice a month, he's talked about this in great detail, that the bureaus clearly understand how to connect you with debts. So if you want to clean up your identity for the purpose of just having your identity cleaned up, that's great. But please don't go into it having some expectation that this is going to help the dispute process. Okay, so I'm going to do these last 2 questions, one from Robert and one from Gregory, and we're gonna call it a day. Can you please expand on why you would dispute every negative on the first letter? I heard that the bureaus can respond and deny any action because you're doing that. Robert, what you heard is 100% false. So I would say a good percentage of my job is debunking nonsense that is spread out there by people who are in the credit repair space who should not be talking. In fact, I'll give you a perfect example. One of my first Facebook Lives that I did, I had on with me a friend of mine by the name of Steve Rieger. Steve Rieger, who is now one of the top guys over at Smart Credit, he used to run the entire dispute division, the West Coast dispute division for TransUnion. Okay, he was the G. He was the number one guy. And we talked about this years ago. I mean, I've known this for years. But when we did this Facebook Live, I said, hey, listen, Answer this question. If you're going to dispute something, do you put everything on one letter? Do you break it up? He says, of course you would put it on one letter. He goes, why wouldn't you? If you have going into the dispute process with the assumption that you have real reasons to dispute something, why would you break it up into multiple letters? It doesn't make sense. Like if you wanted to accomplish something, why would you turn it into like some little puzzle? Well, I'm going to dispute these two items on this letter and these two items. Like you're not going to fool anybody. All you're going to do, in fact, these are his words. He was like, all you're going to do is just agitate us. If you got 10 accounts, 20, 30 accounts, put it all on one letter. They don't care. The bureaus don't care that it's all on one letter. All they're going to do is run it through the machine. The processor is going to go through the disputes, parse it off to the different data furnishers, and call it a day and go on to the next letter. So all these really ridiculous tactics that you hear from people in credit repair. Here's the problem, and this is the reason why I bring on Steve Rieger with me. Another reason why I bring on John Olsheimer. So John Olsheimer used to work for Equifax and FICO. He's on with me all the time, as I just said, twice a month. I bring on guys from the bureaus and from FICO so that you guys can hear what real facts are coming from, if coming from the bureaus and people who worked at FICO. Because otherwise you're getting it from credit repair people who've never talked to anybody who comes from a bureau or who comes from FICO. So anyway, it's a great question. Like Robert, a lot of people believe that. So, but I'm glad you asked it. I'm glad you're able to get an accurate answer. Okay, Gregory, last question here. I have a charge off. It's 6 years old. This will make it the 7th. Can they sell it off to another company in the 7th year? Will it renew the new buyer as a new default? No. So when you get into without going into a lot of detail, Gregory, nobody wants to buy a debt that old. They're not going to sell it for a couple of reasons. One, it's probably almost guaranteed it's time barred. What that means is every state has a different timeline where a creditor can sue you to reclaim that debt. Because again, as I said earlier, debts are assets. They are real things that can be bought and sold. A 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old debt, the way that no collection company is going to buy that. They're like, hey man, this Gregory guy, like, who knows how many collection companies have had it before us? The original creditor couldn't get him to pay. I'm just assuming there's a balance to it. Let's just assume that there is for argument's sake. No collection company is going to say, I know, let's buy this debt and see if we can get a guy to pay who hasn't paid for 6 years. Nobody wants that. Chances are pretty good. A lot of the statute of limitations for creditors to sue people for debt usually runs out about between 3 and 5 years. 5 on the outside. There's a couple of states that go like for 7 years, but it's not very many of them. I know California, I think it's 4. So it's a dead debt. I really wouldn't worry about it. In fact, I probably wouldn't even dispute it. If it's a charge off from an original creditor, first of all, a derogatory item that's that old is probably not hurting you. In fact, if it's one of your older accounts, it's probably helping you a little bit. If it's got some serious age on it. Okay. Gregory says yes, thank you. Okay, Robert, very last. Oh, I thought you were asking a question. This call confirms that I made the right decision. Looking forward to the future results. Great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Robert. And next week, we're going to have John Olsheimer on. It's always fun with John. He's got a big personality. He's a lot of fun, and he's a wealth of knowledge. He's actually one of my mentors. I learned a lot from John, and he's always great to have on. Thank you so much for being with me today. If you're watching a replay of this, so again, this went live 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday. If you're watching a replay of this, you got a question, pop it into Facebook. I'll be more than happy to answer it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will